Magandang buhay!
Welcome back to our channel.
So for today's episode, we are going to discuss about the natural approach. I am teacher Via.
And I am teacher Gian, and let's get started.
The natural approach is a method of language teaching developed by Stephen Krashen and Tracy Terrell in the late 1970s and early 1980s. It aims to foster naturalistic language acquisition in a classroom setting, and to this end it emphasizes communication and places decreased importance on conscious grammar study and explicit correction of students' error. Krashen and Terrell have identified the natural approach with what they call traditional approaches to language teaching. Traditional approaches are defined as based on the use of language in communicative situations without recourse to the native language, and perhaps, needless to say, without reference to grammatical analysis, grammatical drilling, or to a particular theory of grammar. In the natural approach, language output is not forced, but allowed to emerge spontaneously after students have attended to large amounts of comprehensible language input. The natural approach shares many features with the direct method, itself also known as the natural method, which was formulated around 1900s and was also a reaction to grammar translations. Both the natural approach and the direct method are based on the idea of enabling naturalistic language acquisition in the language classroom. They differ in that the natural approach put less emphasis on practice and more on exposure to language input and on reducing learners' anxiety. In the natural approach, there is an emphasis on exposure or input rather than practice, optimizing emotional preparedness for learning, a prolonged period of attention to what the language learners hear before they try to produce language, and a willingness to use written and other materials as a source of comprehensible input. So these are the principles of natural approach. So here are the 4 principles of natural approach. First is class time is devoted primarily to providing input for acquisition. The teacher is the primary source of comprehensible input in the target language, so the teacher is the primary generator of that input. In this principle, the teacher is required to generate a constant flow of language input while providing a multiplicity of non-linguistic clues to assist students interpreting the input. Second, the teacher speaks only the target language in the classroom. So, it is very important for the teacher to speak only the target language in the classroom. The use of the target language in the classroom greatly increases the student's exposure to the target language. On the other hand, by using the target language, students are not only learning about the language, but also learning through the language. The third one is homework may include formal grammar work. So in this principle, the teacher will provide a homework to the students that includes formal grammar work. So by doing this, matest the teacher if the students have really acquired the language of, or if the students have really understand kung unsay gipasabot sa teacher. And the last one is the goals of the course are semantic. Activities may involve the use of certain structures. So we are talking about natural approach, diba? So here, the goal of the course are semantic, which is, when we say semantic, it is the study of meaning. So the teacher, so the activities that is being used in this approach is
katong mga activities nga wherein nga matest gid bitaw kung nabagi comprehension nga nahitabo danhi nga approach. So that's it for the principles of natural approach.
So here are the 8 characteristics of natural approach.
Number 1. The goal of the approach is aimed at the goal of basic personal communication skills. These are conversation, listening to the radio, and etc. So the goal of this approach is to have a full understanding about the language. So the goal of basic personal communication is to convey information and the understanding of that information from one person to another. Number 2 is learners move through 3 stages. So there are 3 stages. First one is pre-production stage. So when we say pre-production stage, students participate in the language activity without having to respond in the target language. So for example, the activities will be students can act out physical commands, identify students, colleagues from teacher description, point to pictures, and so forth. Next is the early production stage. So students respond to either or questions, use of single words and short phrases, fill in charts, and used fixed conversational patterns. For example, is how are you or what's your name? The last stage is the speech emergent phase. So students involve themselves in role play and games, contribute personal information and opinions, and they will participate in group problem solving. Number 3 is the teacher needs to focus on meaning, not on form. So the teacher will focus on the meaning and not on form, because if they focus on the meaning, learners can improve fluency through verbal interaction and meaningful input. Number 4 is the teacher does not correct error. So here, the teacher will not correct error to students' work, because it was based on how the student understand certain topic about, and also it is on how the students comprehend the lessons that they have. So next is the most noteworthy characteristic is its advocacy of a silent period where pre-production stage begins. So as what I have said earlier, in pre-production stage, the student will dili siya necessary nga mag-istorya gid siya, but then in this period, in silent period, the students kana bitawng dili sila necessary nga mag-istorya na gid siya diretso, kay di ba kan na may magidaan na nga stage, but then nana sila input nanay input nga naa sa ilahang mind, but then dili pa nila gid maistorya ang katuang nga language. Sixth is the silent period encourages the delay of oral production until speech emerges. So here, di ba, sa silent period is dili pa gid makaistorya ang student, but then nanay mga input nanay input bitaw nga kuan, nanay mga comprehensible input nga ilang nakuha sa ilang environment, but then dili pa siya maistorya, because wala pa man siya sa stage gid nga kanabitong wala pa na develop gid ang iyang speech. So it's okay nga ma-delay ang kanang oral production danip, kay na time for in order nga maistorya na to sa student ang katong language. Number 7, natural approach encourages the teacher not to insist that learners speak right away. So di ba, as what I have said earlier, ang natural approach is on how the students understand or comprehend anything nga ilang makuan. So di ba, so dinhi dili siya necessary gid nga i-insist gid sa teacher nga ang estudyante makaistorya gid siya dito. So di ba na maginay process, dili magid siya dito gid ni makaistorya ang student, dili dito nga ma-learn sa student, kundi mag-agi pa siya sa mga stages. And that's it. So and last is the natural approach blends well with things like total physical response. So, the total physical response is a language teaching method built around the coordination of speech and action. So, the natural approach and the total physical response blends well together because when we say natural approach, it is on how the children naturally acquire the language, and when we say total physical response, it is built around the coordination of speech and action. So they blend well together because the children will act on how he or she acquired or understand the language.
Okay, so let us now proceed to the process and the 8 teaching techniques of the natural approach.
We have seen that the natural approach adapts techniques and activities freely from various method sources and can be regarded as innovative only with respect to the purposes for which they are recommended and the ways they are used. Krashen and Terrell on 1983 provide suggestions for the use of wide range of activities, all of which are familiar components of situational language teaching, communicative language teaching, and other methods. To illustrate procedural aspect of natural approach, we will cite examples of how such activities are to be used in the natural approach classroom to provide comprehensible input without requiring production of responses or minimal responses in the target language. Here are 8 of some examples of teaching techniques and activities. First is start with TPR commands, or TPR means total physical response commands. At first, the commands are quite simple, just like, for example, stand up, turn around, and raise your right hand. Second is use TPR to teach names of body parts and to introduce numbers and sequence. Just like saying, lay your right hand on your head, put both hands on your shoulder, first touch your nose, then stand up and turn to the right 3 times. Third technique is introduce classroom terms and props into commands. Pick up a pencil and put it under the book. Touch a wall, go to the door and knock 3 times. Any item which can be brought to the class to be incorporated. Pick up the record and place it in a tray. Take the green blanket. Pick up the soap and take it to the woman wearing the green blouse. Fourth, use names of physical characteristics and clothing to identify members of the class by name. The teacher uses context and the items themselves to make the meanings of the keywords clear, just like hair, long, short, and etc. Then a student is described. What is your name? In selecting a student, you should ask the student, what is your name? And you will say, class, look at Barbara. She has long brown hair. Her hair is long and brown. Her hair is not short, it is long. In this example, the teacher uses mime, pointing, and context to ensure comprehension. Questions such as, what is the name of the student with brown hair? The same can be done with articles of clothing and colors. Fifth, use visuals, typically magazine pictures, to introduce new vocabulary and to continue with activities requiring only student names as response. The teacher introduces the pictures to the entire class one at a time, focusing usually on one single item or activity in the picture. For example, Tom has a picture of a sailboat. Joanne has a picture of the family watching television, and so forth. The teacher will then ask questions like, who has the picture with sailboat? Does Susan or Tom have the picture of the people on the beach? Again, the students need only produce a name in response. Sixth technique is use of pictures with TPR, or total physical response. combining the use of physical response and pictures as part of the activity. For example, Jim, find the picture of the little girl with her dog and give to the woman with the pink blouse. 7th, combine observations about the pictures with commands and conditionals. You would say, if there is woman in your picture, stand up. If there is something blue in your picture, touch your right shoulder. And the last and the 8th technique is using pictures. Ask students to point to the picture being described. Just like, for example, picture 1. There are several people in this picture. One appears to be a father. The other is a daughter. What are they doing? Cooking. They are cooking hamburgers. In all these activities, the instructor maintains a constant flow of comprehensible input using key vocabulary items, appropriate gestures, context, repetition, and paraphrase to ensure the comprehensibility of the input. So that's it for the process or procedure and the teaching techniques in the natural approach.
What are the roles of the teacher and the students in a natural approach classroom?
Roles of teacher and students. Let us first know the 3 central or main roles of the teacher in the natural approach. First is that they are the primary source of comprehensible input in the target language. Class time is devoted primarily to providing input for acquisition. Ari, the teacher, is the primary generator of that input. In this role, the teacher is required to generate a constant flow of language input while providing a multiplicity of non-linguistic clues to assist students in interpreting the input. The natural approach demands a much more center stage role for the teacher than do many contemporary communicative methods. Second is the natural approach teacher creates a classroom atmosphere that is interesting, friendly, and in which there is low affective filter for learning. This is achieved in part through such natural approach techniques as not demanding speech from the students before they are ready for it, not correcting student errors, and providing subject matter of high interest to students. Third role of a teacher in a natural approach is that the teacher must choose and orchestrate a rich mix of classroom activities involving a variety of group sizes, content, and context. The teacher is seen as responsible for collecting materials and design their use. These materials, according to Krashen and Terrell, are based not just on teacher perceptions but on elicited students' needs and interests. As with other non-orthodox teaching systems, the natural approach teacher has a particular responsibility to communicate clearly and compelling to students the assumptions, organization, and expectations of the method, since in many cases this will violate student views of what language learning and teaching are supposed to be. So that's it for the role of the teacher. Now let us proceed to the role of the students in the natural approach. There is a basic assumption in the natural approach that learners should not try to learn a language in the usual sense. The extent to which they can lose themselves in activities involving meaningful communication will determine the amount and kind of acquisition they will experience and the fluency they will ultimately demonstrate. Learners have 4 roles in the natural approach classroom. First is provide information about their specific goals so that acquisition activities can focus on the topics and situations most relevant to their needs. Second, take an active role in ensuring comprehensible input. They should learn and use conversational management techniques to regulate input. Third, decide when to start producing speech and when to upgrade it. And last, decide with the teacher the relative amount of time to be devoted to them and perhaps even complete and correct them independently. Learners are expected to participate in communication activities with other learners. Although communication activities are seen to provide naturalistic practice and to create a sense of camaraderie, which lowers the affective filter, they may fail to provide learners with well-formed and comprehensible input at the 1+1 level. Krashen and Terrell warn of these shortcomings but do not suggest means for their amelioration.
In this approach, there are also strengths and weaknesses. I am going to present to you the 3 strengths and 3 weaknesses of the natural approach.
So now, let us proceed to the strengths and weaknesses of the natural approach. 3 of the main strengths of the natural approach is that this method is very easy, reliable as it's widely used, and there is no grammar instruction in this method. However, the weaknesses are the following. It takes long time and learner can do only elementary things. It does not suit for those who do not have much time, and the method rarely concerns about correctness.
In addition, for this natural approach, there are also requirements for optimal input.
So here are the 6 requirements for optimal input. First is comprehensible. The entire goal of classroom practice in the natural approach is to provide comprehensible input. Natural approach teachers utilize pictures and students' previous knowledge to make their speech comprehensible from the first day. Second is interesting or relevant. This is a serious problem for a foreign language class. Natural approach attempt to capture students' interest by using what Terrell terms the affective acquisition activities, adapted from Christensen, that encourage discussion of topics of personal interest to the students. Just like, for example, suppose you are a famous person and there is a newspaper article about you. Tell at least one thing about yourself which is mentioned in the article, and so on. In the early stages of the natural approach, classroom discussion focuses on personal information, the goal being to establish a group feeling. Later, students discuss their past histories and eventually they are able to talk about their hopes and plans for the future. Third is not grammatically sequenced. The focus of the class is not on the presentation of grammar. There is a tendency for certain structures to be used more often in certain stages, but there is no deliberate sequencing. Fourth is quantity. Since the entire class period is filled with comprehensible input, the natural approach meets this requirement as well as any foreign language teaching method can. Fifth, affective filter level. Since the natural approach attempts to remain true to the input hypothesis, many sources of anxiety are reduced or eliminated. Students do not have to produce in the second language until they feel they are ready. Error correction for form is not done in the classroom. Also, an attempt is made to discuss topics that are interesting to students. This predicts lower filter strength than most other methods. Sixth and the last is tools for conversational management. Some tools for conversational management are provided in the form of very short dialogues, designed to help students converse with native speakers on predictable and frequent topics. Also, students are introduced right from the beginning to phrases and expressions that will help them control the teacher's input.
So what have you learned about the natural approach method? So the natural approach is designed to be consistent with what is known of monitor functioning. The absence of error correction in the classroom is a recognition that there is constraint on when the conscious grammar is used. Students are expected to utilize the monitor only at home, when they have time, when they are focused on form, and when they know or are learning a rule. At the university level, grammar homework is assigned to everyone, but it is conceivable that the natural approach can be adopted for variations in monitor use with varying amounts of homework or different type homework assignments for under or optimal users. While little experimentation has been done with children, SLA theory predicts that younger children would not profit from grammar homework, while older children and adolescents might be able to handle limited amounts.
To sum it up, natural approach is designed to be consistent with what is known of monitor functioning. The natural approach belongs to a tradition of language teaching methods based on observation and interpretation of how learners acquire both first and second languages in non-formal settings. Natural approach focuses on comprehension and meaningful communication as well as the provision of the right kinds of comprehensible input provide the necessary and sufficient condition for successful classroom second and foreign language acquisition. Like communicative language teaching, the natural approach is hence evolutionary rather than revolutionary in its procedure.
So that's it for today's episode on natural approach. We hope that you learned something from us.
Our next video will be about the total physical response.
Please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for the updates. I am Via.
And I am Gian.
God bless us all.
Let me love, boy, what you know. Rufus, boy, let me